Hello and welcome to the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chains, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. I hope that you're having a great day. Today's guest is Jeremy Douglas. He's the Director of Partnerships at Delterra. Delterra is an environmental not-for-profit company. They're a spin-off from McKinsey, and they're focusing on human interactions. They're working with different countries around the world on better recycling processes, both upstream and downstream, both in the producing of products and then the reusing, recycling, and repurposing of products. In today's conversation, we unpack a ton of stuff, including economic drivers, difficulties in different industries and verticals, but we also spend some time talking about traceability and the importance of having that in a recycling package. So without any further ado, let's jump right in. Hey, Jeremy. Well, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Reed. Great to be here.
Yeah, we're glad that you can spend the time with us today, and I'd love to just jump right into this. So if you could just, for our audience, just tell us a little bit about Delterra and your role at the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So Delterra is an environmental nonprofit. We were founded by the consulting firm McKinsey and Company in 2018, but we're now independent. And what we do is find solutions to interactions with human systems that impact the environment in a negative way. So we're trying to come up with a way that we can improve that situation, recognizing that there's not environmental problems so much as there's human interaction with the environment that are the problems. And what we're focusing on as the first big human system that we want to tackle is waste and recycling systems, and especially in the global south, which have the least ability to manage the overflowing amount of waste, especially plastics and other sorts of waste. So right now we're working in Indonesia, Argentina, and Brazil to come up with solutions to create more of a circular economy for all those different materials that would normally end up in landfill or burned or end up in the environment, like in oceans or rivers. And what my role is with Delterra is Director of Partnerships. So I'm working closely with others who want to help see more of a circular economy for materials in the global south. And that includes some of the big brands like P&G, Mars, Amcor, others like that who are some of our partners. And then also some more philanthropic foundations like Mintaru Foundation. And then also oversee communications and external relations. So kind of a many hat role trying to bring together a coalition of the willing who want to help see more circular economy in global south countries.
I appreciate the background on that. And we've talked before, and this topic is so big and everyone is involved. And not being the youngest person in the room, I've been through this a couple of times before. But what's different today? Sustainability is such a hot topic, but being very transparent, some folks use it as just kind of like a greenwashing, right? We're just going with what's happening and others are really diving in. Can you provide us some insight into what's currently going on with recycling and waste stream landscapes and what they look like? Because I literally today pulled in my recycling garbage can and I see my neighbor out there and they have things in their recycling garbage can that are not recyclable. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on this.
That is called wish cycling, where people put things in recycling where they probably know it's not recyclable, but hope that it will be recycled somehow. This week, maybe they will figure out a way to recycle this thing that they never have before. But I think to your broader question about sustainability, yeah, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. Like you see it everywhere. And I don't think there's a common definition of it. I remember one colleague saying something very accurate about sustainability. It's like, there is no spectrum of sustainability. It's either something is sustainable or it's not. Sustainability means like it can continue to be sustained at that current level. And if it's not, then it's not sustainable. So, we have this Earth Overshoot Day that gets earlier and earlier every year, which is the point at which we've exhausted all of the resources that can sustain our planet in that given year. And so we're currently unsustainable. And part of the discussion around sustainability is the things that we use the physical materials that we dig out of the earth to use for things like plastics or for wood products or for metals or any of those things that we mine or extract in order to create materials. And we're just continuing to take more and more materials out of the earth and at a rate that is not sustainable. So this is kind of what we're looking at with waste streams is we produce all of this stuff every year, but so much of it is just going to landfill. It's single use and it's discarded. And we have it depends on where you look for the statistics, but somewhere between 70 to 90% of what we use doesn't get reused and it goes to landfill. So that's our big challenge. It's really an economics and markets challenge is how do you use materials that are already in circulation for the production of new products and new materials? And that's what we're trying to figure out is how can we capture those materials from the point of recycling in the first place from households and businesses? And once you've captured those different materials, then how can you find ways to turn them into the same product again or another product so that they stay in circulation? This whole idea of circular economy, things keep going back into circulation. For us, that's sustainability as something continues to be used and you don't have to rely on the production of new materials anymore. And this is the big topic of conversation right now with regards to climate change and regards to plastics as well. There's two big efforts underway with that, obviously the Paris Agreement and the efforts to reduce our emissions. And then right now there's also a plastics agreement, a treaty discussion underway led by the UN, where they are planning to have a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution and have that agreement done by the end of next year, which is very ambitious. But both the climate and the plastics conversation will have to focus on reducing production of materials. So how can we limit the amount of new materials we're producing and increase the amount of circulation of existing things that would have otherwise gone to landfill? So the main focus is how can you actually ensure things continue to go in circulation rather than single use?
I love the definition. It's either a yes or no. The light switch is on or off. You're either sustainable or you're not. There's no variance of sustainability. And that really hit home with me. And it gave me a pause. That's something to really think on. And then at 70 to 90% of single use, we see it a lot. More and more, just drinking from a water cup instead of using the plastics all the time. We do see this. I want to just shift here just a little bit because when we think about supply chains, visibility and traceability are something that are big for us. So how is this traceability playing an important or not important role in recycling and plastic reductions? Are there some benefits that we're seeing that enhance traceability? I mean, this is a topic we kind of talked about beforehand, and I want to see if we can maybe expand on this a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give a bit of context for traceability. So Delterra, we work very much on the ground, very practical solutions in the countries where we operate. So most of our staff are working in those countries all the way through the entire plastics value chain. So we work upstream with companies to help them to come up with strategies to reduce packaging waste and really figure out how to turn off the tap at the very source. And then we also work downstream with communities and municipalities. Once things are out there, how do you get people to separate into recycling and organics and refuse who've never done that before, where everything went to landfill previously? And then how do you work with different waste worker organizations or cooperatives to collect those materials? Then how do they sort them? And then ultimately, how can they find buyers for those? Like who wants to buy that recycled material? Some of those are the brands that I mentioned, like consumer goods companies are looking for recycled plastics a lot. The demand has never been higher, actually, because of pressure from consumers and also from legislation like extended producer responsibility, where companies who produce plastics are required to contribute to collecting that and creating more circular markets. So we're working along the entire value chain to, again, be there as almost like a catalyst to stimulate this circular economy. And then we kind of step back when we feel like it's operating well. And one of the things we've noticed working across that value chain is that there's a real lack of transparency about producing plastics. If you were to really press them on how do you know exactly where that recycled plastic material came from, they would probably be hard pressed to actually show you how it traces through from the original source of collection to where it is now. And that has a couple of concerns, which led us to focus more on traceability of plastics. One is about double counting, making sure that there isn't double counting happening or triple or whatever it might be, that when you claim that there's a ton of recycled plastics, that is only 1 ton. So we want to have additionality there. We don't want to people counting it every step of the way, and then it gives a false perspective of how much plastics is actually recycled. And then the other concern is about ethical and human rights issues. Is that plastic coming from a family living on a dump, or is it coming from a household or a business locally where it was collected in an ethical way? So we want to ensure that we're not getting involved in human rights issues around indentured servitude. And of course, all of those brands who are sourcing recycled plastics don't want to be involved in that either. And there's some more efforts underway right now to create more of a coalition of different brands who are going to abide by principles around transparency of these sort of informal sector plastics collection. So what we're doing specifically now is piloting, and this is where it ties in with GS1. We're working on a material traceability technology that's based on blockchain, and it's using GS1 standards and coding to trace from the point of collection all the way through to offtake and sale to a brand or to processing, so that a brand would be able to see across all of the different points, okay, this bottle, the recycled plastic in this bottle came from that particular recycling center in Buenos Aires, Argentina, or wherever it might be. And so they can have that certainty that this came from an ethical source and that it wasn't double counted. The gold standard for us is to be able to prove that this traceability can work, and then hopefully we can get brands and others along the value chain to come on board with this. It could also be something that would be valuable for plastic credits if that was an avenue we wanted to pursue, selling plastic credits based on the recycled content there, and it can be verified through this technology. We're piloting it right now in Argentina, and we hope to expand and roll out in other countries where we're working. But so far, so good. We've got a lot of good feedback from the different brands and the recycling cooperatives and others along the way that they're very keen to use this, and it meets a lot of the things they're looking for. So that's what we're doing on traceability. We think it's going to be really important, especially in the global context of a plastics agreement, because if you're going to talk about increasing in recycling rates and increasing in recycled content in products, you're going to need to prove that somehow, and how are you going to prove it? But we think that this is the way to do it. So.
I'm really delighted to hear this and how you just shared all that. I mean, you talked about packaging upstream, and you talked about separating and recycling and just organic waste downstream, being the catalyst in their environments. But these are all the things that we're doing in supply chains as it is, right? And you're just inserting yourselves in there and trying to leverage standards that are being used today, so you don't have to create something different, another thing to do for the people. Leverage things that are already in place, and then add some things that aren't in place, like blockchain for traceability. But we're seeing it right now. I mean, I'm seeing it in the work that we're doing and the conversations we're having. Is the demand for recyclable products is up, and it doesn't have to be a cost center. It can be a profit center for environments. I would like to ask you, though, you talked about best practices and how to get folks to change their ways. We've seen this. My college roommate lives in San Francisco, and I go out to visit him once a year, and we hang out. And I just remember maybe 15 years ago, could have even been 20 years ago. I've been out of college for quite some time. The number of garbage cans he had outside of his house, there's whatever they called it in the city there, but it was like 6 garbage cans. And we've seen that change. But what are some things that, one, it's hard to get people to change, or two, a little trick that's just gotten people to flip quicker? Either one of those.
I think in Germany will maybe even put San Francisco to shame, because they have multiple different sortation things, and everybody's very compliant with. I think Germany's got one of the highest recycling rates in the world. But it's tough because recycling is usually a municipal responsibility.
That's right.
And so every municipality has a different system. So it's like, I don't blame people for being confused or putting the things in the wrong bins, or even just giving up, as I think some people do, are like, I can't figure it out, so I'm just going to throw it all in the garbage. This is one of the biggest challenges. There's no harmonization, no standardization across different regions like states or country level or what have you. So it's confusing. And then even within municipalities, things change all the time. I notice myself, it's like every few months, there might be a new sticker on the bin saying, okay, now these things that weren't previously recyclable now are recyclable. It's tough. So that's downstream. It's like what goes in which bin, which I don't think we should put the burden on consumers. We should figure out how to work with brands to eliminate unnecessary materials that shouldn't even be produced in the first place. But then for consumer, like I think your question is about what can people do that's like the switch or something easy. You were holding up your reusable thermos there, your coffee mug there. That's an easy thing, you know. I think looking upstream, when you look at the 3 R's, reduce is the first thing. So what can I just reduce that I don't need that to buy those things, or I can use something like a reuse system. Reuse is getting a lot of traction and popularity right now. There's the loop system that was started by TerraCycle, trying to get brands and retailers like supermarkets on board. How can we use reuse systems more so that we're not doing single-use packaging? I think this is a huge opportunity, especially with the boom in food delivery services. Like, think of how much waste is created by those food delivery services. So reuse, I think that's something people can think about easily at home, is like bringing reusable containers for takeaway or for coffee or those sorts of things. But really, I think using the voice and the advocacy, I think that's what actually got the plastics issue to the point now where we're talking about a legally binding global agreement to end plastic pollution. I think because there was so much consumer attention to this and lots of calling out totally ridiculous packaging and unnecessary use of plastic materials and the just boom in single-use items, I think it came to the collective attention of consumers to the point where they were pressuring brands, and then brands were starting to feel like, okay, we got to really do something now to address this. And a number of them that we work with they're very serious about reducing the plastic footprint and finding more recycled materials. But it's a journey. It's the whole way we manage waste and recycling is a system that's fundamentally broken and has been around for decades. And we're now trying to figure out the best way that we can develop more of a circular system out of it. So for consumers, I think do what you can on reducing packaging and try to recycle as best as possible, because I know there's a lot of articles and some critique about recycling doesn't work and it doesn't matter. But I think especially in the countries we work, where there's not even an option to recycle, you can make huge gains and huge improvements, because you're going from 0% recycling to 10 or 15% is still a lot of materials that you're then keeping out of the environment or being burned or whatnot. So even though recycling rates should be much higher, I agree, there's still a lot of progress to be made in most of the world.
I think you make a good point. I mean, we don't have to be just running down the negative train. And there has been a lot of awareness of recycling programs in the United States that were a bit of a farce. And we called it recycling, and we were really shipping it to somebody else's backyard. And they were dealing with it, and then they realized they weren't dealing with it well enough, and they sent it to somebody else's backyard, and they just started burning it. And it's just kind of like out of sight, out of mind. But it's still the same planet. And that's why I like that statement you made in the beginning. It's either sustainable or it's not sustainable. Right? And it's just the way it is. And it is a journey, and change doesn't happen overnight. And awareness and education and refinement and improvement, and as long as we keep leaning in, and moving forward, it does get better. We are getting better. We're getting more cognizant about it. And I often remind myself, this happened with having children, and maybe it wasn't me reminding myself. Maybe it was my wife reminding me. And then I just remind myself of what she told me. But we need to allow the kids to learn on their own. We need to direct them, but they need to learn on their own. And some will learn right away and some will learn a little bit different. But once they learn on their own, then it's ingrained and they have it. And we need to give grace and forgiveness when it's not perfect, right? So like sometimes I have been critical. You can't throw that pizza box out. Pizza box is not recyclable. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's cardboard. I'm like, it's got food oils in it and these things and those things. And like, you got to read up, and you almost are like flexing I've been reading up and I care more, but you're being critical of folks that are trying. I like that journey bit. And our municipality last year stopped recycling glass because it was too costly for them. Yeah. And everyone was like, what? And so now when my sister, who lives out of state, comes in and she's like, oh, where's your recycling? I'm like, we don't recycle glass. And she's like, what are you talking about? It's like the number one thing recycled. I'm like, our municipality changed, but we have to get involved. So I do like that. And then you did mention the 3 R's, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's reduce, reuse, and repurpose, or is it recycle, reuse, repurpose, or is it something else?
There's more R's appearing every day, I feel like. I think there was 7 at the last one I saw. Like, everyone's coming up with creative. There's like refuse, rethink. But anyway, I just boil it down to the original three just
Yeah.
for simplicity's sake. So reduce,
Okay.
reuse, recycle. But there are many more. There's repair. There's a whole bunch of other things in there, which are important, but it's
Yeah.
hard to keep track of what the latest status is on this.
Very interesting. All right. So we talked about, way consumers can reduce their use of plastics a little bit. We talked about the water jug I'm using. What are some other ways that you're seeing some common trends that are effective right now in reducing plastics?
I want to come back, maybe I'll get to that one in a sec, but I want to come back to your point about cost, about not recycling glass anymore in your municipality because of cost. And if I had to boil the whole challenge down to one thing, I would say it's economics, is because if it actually made financial sense to use recycled materials, we would have very few things going to landfill if there was actually a market for them, that someone was willing to buy those materials at a price that was higher than what it costs to collect and process them. And that's
Right.
just the unfortunate market forces that are working against the entire system right now, is that it's cheaper to use virgin plastics and most other virgin materials than it is to use recycled materials. And so it's like the cards are stacked against us from the very beginning. And this is where you need policy to intervene. And maybe this might be something that with a global plastics agreement could come into place. But you've got companies operating as companies do to make a profit.
Yeah.
So what's the incentive for them to spend more money on their materials and to put them at a competitive disadvantage to all of their peer companies? None of them are willing to do that. I think what they're saying is, please regulate us all at the same level. So then we have the equal playing field.
Yeah.
So tell us all, okay, you need to meet these standards, or you need this recycled content. And then we all have to figure out the best, most cost efficient way of doing that. But right now, without those standards or regulation, I think they're reluctant to spend 5 times as much on your
And why
packaging and
would
pass
they?
that along to consumers. And then consumers aren't going to pay that extra cost on things, and you're going to kill your own business. This is like the challenge we're facing with the circular economy. Is unfortunately, it costs more to reuse materials that have already been produced because of the logistics and the processing and collection from households of processing, getting it back to the standard. It's lower quality generally when you're doing recycled materials. So this is the single biggest challenge we're trying to figure out, is how to get the economics working. And it's not just plastics, it's all materials, e-waste as well. Like, think of how much e-waste there is in the world right now that we need to figure out a way for that. Construction, demolition, medical waste. There's many different things there. Even organics is another big focus of ours, is because organics in most of the world is more than 50% of the waste stream is like food waste and trimmings and those sorts of organic materials. When they go into a landfill, they produce methane emissions, which is 80 times more potent than CO2 in the short term. So this is like a very highly potent global warming accelerant. And a way to deal with that would be separate your organic materials and process them into compost that could be used in agriculture or something. Makes sense, but again, it costs more to do that than using chemical fertilizer or those sorts of things. So these are the challenges that at Delterra we're looking at right now, is how can we stimulate viable markets for materials, recycled materials, so that they stay out of landfill or the environment. And it's helping to create more opportunities for those to have second, third, fourth, fifth life. We're working against a lot of the economic challenges right now. I just wanted to talk about that point you
I'm
made
so
about.
glad you did.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you did, because the economics is the driver. We often say, in business, you're doing things for 3 major reasons: make a profit, reduce expenses, or be compliant, because there's some law out there that says you have to do it this way. And then outside of that, it's, if we have extra things, we can do extra things. We can be more philanthropic if we can. But those are the driving forces. And that's what happens, especially when you talk about some of these other economic environments where they don't have opportunities to reinvent or to do things, or they are forced to because of it. I'm really glad you took the time to bring that up. And then e-waste, medical waste, organic waste. We actually did an episode just on food waste because of food safety. And food waste is up to like 40% of food in the United States is wasted. And a lot of it is from harvesting to the sale. It just got wasted somewhere along the way there. It didn't spoil. It was wasted along the way in some aspects. So this is very complicated and very layered. And it's like a web of webs of webs. It is not easy. So let me reframe this a little bit. We talked about, reducing plastics and stuff, but let's take it to another level. Where do you see the journey of sustainability and plastic reduction heading in the future?
Well, I was at the second intergovernmental negotiating committee meeting in Paris in May for this global plastics agreement. The next one's coming up in Kenya in November. There's 5 of them in total. And this is where these 175 countries who agreed to go through this process are trying to come up with a binding document or instrument. They call it binding instrument on ending plastic pollution. And so as we're following that, there's certain themes that are emerging, including looking at it maybe in the way that climate change agreement has been done, where it's going to be up to different countries to meet their own targets and standards as sort of nationally determined contributions. But some things such as eliminating unnecessary or problematic plastics has come up, looking at also the impact on the informal sector. There's millions of people employed informally working to collect plastics and other materials that for them they can sell for not very much money for most people in the world, but makes a difference for them and they can create livelihoods there. So, but they're also suffering from health and marginalization and many other issues. So we're looking how to address that. So I think production is kind of the elephant in the room, is how can you possibly end plastic pollution if the production of new plastic materials continues to go up and to the right. So that's something that actually has been somewhat contentious, because I think some of the countries, you can imagine which ones who are more like on the oil producing, who don't want to see any limits to production and would rather focus more on recycling and collection. And then other countries who formed, it's called a high ambition coalition. So there's a number of countries who are setting very high ambition targets that have limits to production and want to see production actually go in the opposite direction, start reducing, which would mean that we're using more recycled materials. This is being hashed out right now in these negotiation sessions, and it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But some of the standards that could come into place are things like extended producer responsibility, which some countries and some states have already, where anyone producing plastic has to pay into collecting that and meeting targets for recycled materials. And then also some countries have been piloting things like minimum recycled content for anyone with plastic packaging. And those content minimums will increase over time. I think that could be valuable for helping to stimulate the market for these recycled materials. Is like, if you have to meet a certain content, then you have to source that from somewhere, and you're going to have to pay whatever the market rate is in order to get those plastic materials, which will help drive more what we were talking about with the cost. I feel like that's a positive policy mechanism that will help stimulate more of the circular economy for recycled plastics, because brands will have to purchase that plastic at whatever the market rate is. So I think those are some of the things that are kind of in development right now. A lot still to be figured out. There's many different chemical components within different types of plastics. And is there a way to have more standardization around what actually goes into different plastic resins and materials, and to understand what the health impacts of those are as well.
I'm so glad that you guys are involved with this and sharing your time with us today about all the complexities of it and driving it forward. This is a journey. I want to ask you a couple of personal questions, if you don't mind, because we ask these 2 questions of everybody on our show. And my first one is, what's your favorite technology that you're using right now? Either for work or personal. What can you share with us? What's your favorite piece?
Yeah. I think like most people would probably say their iPhone or something like that, but I'll actually say my Garmin watch is the one thing I love. And I'm obsessed with the data that it can track, from sleep to exercise to all sorts of stuff. So that's the one thing, more than my phone, I have with me all the time, because it's literally on my wrist 24/7.
Awesome. Yeah, I see a lot of people with that as well and diving into it. Now, the other question we have is, what's something that's just blown your mind? I mean, the conversation today, it's not easy for 30, 40-minute conversation, and you just start to see the complexity of it. And it's, you pull one string and 1,000 other strings are affected. But what's something that's blown your mind and changed the way you look at the world?
One of the materials we didn't talk about really, but is a huge problem, is textiles and fashion, like apparel. But fast fashion is just like out of control. And we recycle, I think, less than 1% of textiles are actually recycled. And so as part of this session a few months ago, we came together to problem solve, like, how can we figure out more of a circular economy for fashion as well, like textiles. And there was one company in there that was doing fiber welding, which this blows my mind to the point where I don't even know how to describe it properly. But essentially, when you're using recycled fibers, long fibers have better strength and they
Yep.
work for performance a lot better. When you're recycling, they break down into smaller fibers. And so this company has figured out a way how to basically molecularly weld these small fibers to create longer fibers again, so that they have the performance and strength of new materials. I thought this was such a cool idea. Of like, I don't even know how you would come up with that concept and make it scalable, but I think they're having a lot of great success. And this could be one of those breakthroughs for creating more of a market for recycled textiles and making sure that those recycled textiles are performing as good as new materials.
That just blew my mind. I hadn't heard of that. I'm going to be researching them after this call is over. This year, we did our Startup Lab pitch competition at our Connect conference. We had 7 startups. Big theme was recyclability or sustainability. Sustainability more than recyclability. We had one company that was a vending machine with its own bottling company inside, where you'd have reusable bottles, which were more or less like, these type, but smaller and usable. They focused on construction sites. Employees could have it and it just scans out to them, and they could have it for a day, a week, or whatever. And they put it back in, it cleans it, repurposes it, and then uses it again. I thought that was really cool. We had another company called Peel On, which made this organic, think of it like saran wrap, but organic. And it actually increased the shelf life of produce, and it was 100% recyclable. So like it was organic. So like you could just throw it in the trash and boom, goes back in the earth and comes back. And it was like those ideas. And then this fiber welding, I'm definitely going to be looking into them. That is very, very interesting. That's all the time we have for today. I really appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us and sharing some of your knowledge. And I really wish you much success. You said there was 5 meetings. How many have been completed?
There's been 2 so far. So
okay.
1 more towards the end of the year, and then 2 more next year. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, by the end of 2024, we've got a globally binding agreement. So I don't think anyone really saw this coming, to be honest, that we could actually get most of the countries in the world to agree to create something legally binding. So it's very promising.
That is a lot of work, 175 countries, a lot of economic differences, a lot of different cultural values. This is not easy stuff. And fingers crossed, and wishing you all much success. Thanks again for spending the time with us today.
Thanks so much, Reed. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1US. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe to our feed and explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.